And I think we are hopefully live now. So, welcome everyone to this panel titled Sword, Sorcery and Sound, Fantasy Audio Fiction. So this panel will be about, as you can tell from the title, about fantasy and audio fiction. What does that look like? How might we go about using some tips and techniques for making the best out of fantasy in our audio fiction? Things like that. So just a couple of reminders before we introduce our lovely panelists. We do have our Audio Fiction Con booklet that has been produced, so do check that out in the breaks. We have some fun games and some shiny data from our listener survey as well. We of course have our artist alley with some incredible art. I've had a look and it just blows my mind. It's absolutely beautiful. The art in there. We have the Con voice channel as well as a chat channel in the Discord as well, the Podcast Book Club Discord. And we will, of course, be taking listener questions at the end of the panel as well. So feel free to either save them for the end or drop them as we go along. And I will try to monitor the chat as we go along. Okay, so without any further ado, let's introduce the panelists. I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves. So I will start off with the first person on my screen, which is Audrey. Audrey, please go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. I'm Audrey. I am from Luxembourg, and I make the audio drama The Heart Pyre, which I make all on my own, and is an interactive fantasy show with like a little bit of steampunk in it, and interactive in the sense that after each episode, people can vote how it continues. So yeah, that's my main project that takes away all of my time.
Perfect, thank you very much. I'll go next to Eira. Eira, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Eira. I have made a shocking amount of episodes of podcasts, about 215 now, across 5 different shows, 2 of which are fantasy shows in a pretty straightforward way. One of them, The 12 Arms Conspiracy, is like kind of fantasy in a magical school, and the other one is Remnants, which is a more dark, weird fantasy set in a strange kind of other nether world. And yeah, I also have a bunch of other less fantasy related shows.
Wonderful, incredible, fantastic. And our next panelist, Lumi, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Lumi Oaks. Any pronouns? I have my name on 2 different shows right now. One of them is me directing and producing Wanderer's Journal, which is a fantasy podcast. So that is the one that I think is most relevant here. I did not write that one. For that, I would credit my wonderful creative partner, Timothy Raphael. But I did help with story editing and a bunch of other decisions. Yeah. So yeah, that's it.
Perfect. So let's get on to the first question. So I thought I would start with just a little opener. It doesn't, not necessarily specific to audio fiction, but just what is your general experience with fantasy? Was there anything growing up that you loved fantasy-wise? Any fandoms, any events, any media, anything like that? This is your opportunity to totally nerd out. So I will start off in reverse order this time. I'll start off with you, Lumi.
Oh no. No, yeah, I've always loved fantasy, but I have a difficult time mentioning any specific things right now.
That's fine.
But I've read a lot of fantasy novels growing up, and I have always, I don't know, I like magic, I like fantasy things, I like world building and stuff. I also like very sort of kind of cozy kind of fantasy things. I've always really liked the Moomin novels, which I think kind of counts as fantasy, and those types of things. Yeah, I think that's
wonderful. Thank you. And Eira?
I grew up completely obsessed with Lord of the Rings, which is like the most
Mhm.
classic fantasy thing. I'm like currently behind where my laptop is. I can see my Lord of the Rings shrine from where I'm currently sat, where I have a large collection of the books. That was massively influential on me when I was growing up. And I think part of the reason I fell in love with storytelling as a medium was the special features that came with the extended edition DVDs of the Lord of the Rings. How you take a story apart and you look at all of its moving pieces, and that um, made me kind of think so much about how the things that you love are created by people just like you. And it was a really cool, and it was incredibly informative to like the start I had as a storyteller. And I was also super obsessed with the His Dark Materials stories, which are a very different kind of fantasy that speaks to a completely different sort of storytelling, where it feels like this magical world might just be right there if you just know how to look for it. It's all really cool, and I like the flexibility of the genre in that way.
Wonderful. I love that point about the special features and behind the scenes, inspiring you to actually use that. I think hopefully that's something what Audio Fiction Con and the panels and such can help inspire other people to do, hopefully. It's always good to know how things work behind the scenes, isn't it? So I really love that. And last but not least, Audrey.
Yeah, very similar. Also, The Lord of the Rings is like the movies and like the special editions and everything. Just absolutely fantastic, and just obsessed over it and the storytelling in it. But I'm an avid reader, so I read a lot of fantasy, a lot of science fiction, like everything that's genre. Yeah, so growing up, just a lot of reading. I don't know. There's Of course, the books we shall not name. I was just in that generation, so that was a big part until like, a couple years ago. But otherwise, yeah, I'm part here in Luxembourg of like the Science Fiction Fantasy Society, so we organize a lot of events for like nerdy spaces, and I think that's also very fantastic about anything that's like fantasy science fiction. It's often very much together, and just how many people you meet and like the community it builds. So that's very, very interesting, and what I really love about it.
Wonderful. I love that point. Is that an open society by any chance that anyone can join?
Yes, in the sense that you kind of have to be in the country.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. So because we mostly organize events here, so I suppose someone international could help out, but then it's like, what's the point of it?
No, of
Since
course, totally. It's important to have that local community as well,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
I really do love that. Thank you very much. Okay, so the next question is, what drew you to using fantasy specifically as the genre for your audio drama compared to others? Or what drew you to working on an audio drama that is fantasy based? Yeah, go ahead. Who wants to start?
I can start.
Yeah.
The story that I'm using for the Hardpire is kind of a story I've been dragging along for over a decade. It was one of the first things I wasn't like actively working on it. I was just like thinking of the characters and stuff for like 15 years. And then I just decided to actually work on it. And I think I chose fantasy just because it's so open with the world building. You can do whatever you want, and it's so fun to world building and to create your own world, and um, to not be restrained by what like our world is like. You can just be like, oh, it's like this, but then I don't want it to reflect this part of like the world, so I'm not going to do that. Which is one of the most fun things about fantasy. Yeah, and I think that's why I chose fantasy, just because it's so open and you can do whatever you want with it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Lumi, how about yourself?
Yeah, I've always personally been very drawn to genres that talk about difficult things through kind of metaphorical or thematic means, which I think fantasy can do a lot, because you can sort of there's a lot of things that you have a lot of things you can work with, and you can sort of thematically build out from. For me personally, I know there's also, with Wanderer's Journal and stuff, there's also some TTRPG influence. I've always been very involved with the TTRPG kind of community, and I know, and there are certain elements of Wanderer's Journal that have sort of a two-person TTRPG kind of vibe to the way it's, not necessarily the way it's written, but the way it's sort of inspired from. And I think, and those things are just very familiar to me. So it was also kind of, I think, the easy go-to sometimes. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that point about TTRPG. I
Mm.
wonder, I'm curious, do you think there's any difference in the way that fantasy is used in a TTRPG versus pure audio fiction, or do you think it's very similar storytelling?
I mean, it depends a lot on how the group works and what type of system you're
Mm.
using and all of those different things. One thing I like about TTRPGs, at least some systems, is that oftentimes you can sort of craft the world along with players and sort of gradually. So you can change things, you can sort of build out from one starting point and then sort of thematically build from there as you sort of discover the world together. And I think there are influences of that type of storytelling also in Wanderer's Journal. Yeah, but it depends a lot. And then obviously there's the collaborative, and Wanderer's Journal is only collaborative insofar that well, you know, there's a team of people involved and stuff like that. But Timothy, Raphael, and I are also talking. That, yeah.
Wonderful. I love that. It's very emergent, I would say, isn't it, for TTRPGs? Yeah, I love that. Okay, and Eira.
It wasn't really a conscious decision to start working in fantasy as a genre. I'm kind of polyamorous about the kind of genres I write in. It's all about what happens, how the story works, what it is, and getting to know what the story is. So yeah, I've always kind of actually shied away from fantasy previously because of that expansive nature that everyone else has been talking about as this like asset that it has, and it certainly is. But I really like constraints as a writer. I'm a very organizer heavy writer. I like a really tight plan, and fantasy can be so expansive that it can feel kind of like intimidating to approach. So it wasn't until I was sort of feeling more confident as a writer that I felt more open to actually picking up the ideas that I had that fit into that genre, which is how you get then Remnants and then the 12 Arms Conspiracy, which has its own like expansive, massive world with all of this lore and stuff going on with it. Which, yeah, this is an extra dynamic, I guess, of how you're trying to structure the story, where you're simultaneously bearing in mind that you've got an extra rule set that you have to keep on top of and maintain and keep consistent. And I really want things to feel cohesive, so everything also has to serve the story. And yeah, I found it really exciting to do and really fun to do. Now that I've like, I guess, allowed myself to explore it as a genre more, it's been really fun.
I love that. I love that point about constraint versus the openness in fantasy. And having listened to Spirit Box Radio and some of Remnants, I can tell the sort of structural differences between the two. Remnants feels a lot more like you're really laying down like a foundation. You're really working with a structure and building up this story. So yeah, I really love that point. I think that's really interesting. So the next question on my list is, so I'm going to shout out the research we did in the listener survey. So the research we did shows that fantasy was the third most popular genre out of the 10 that were available, which followed, the first two were sci-fi, was horror was first, and then sci-fi was second, and then fantasy was third. I think you've touched on an answer for this a little bit, but do you think there are certain aspects to audio drama that lend itself to fantasy being a more popular genre than others?
I
You go.
what I wanted to say is I do think that audio dramas are very much a niche. And the people who are into niches are very often just nerds into sci-fi and fantasy and horror anyway. And especially talking about the horror, it's such a big thing because um, it's like a wheel. Like you have people making horror, and then you attract the horror fans, and they talk to other horror fans, and that's how it grows. Especially because horror is such a niche. Like how many people actually like horror? As like an avid horror reader, whenever I talk to people about just books, they're always no one ever reads horror. So I think since we are such niches, we find each other, and then we like what we like in any kind of medium. Um, and we like fantasy, and we like sci-fi, and we like horror. Which I think it's a bit sad for like the like humor and comedy. I feel like there's not a lot of comedy, and I think audio drama could be very good for comedy. But there are a few, but they don't become like super big, I feel like, which is a bit sad. But yeah, otherwise, I think fantasy, again, with like this freedom of things, you can like as a listener imagine yourself like, oh, what could this be? Which is similar to books. You don't have the visuals, so you imagine it yourself. Um, which could be good and could be difficult, especially for audio drama, because how do you represent just like a big castle or something without your characters being like, oh my god, this castle is so big, which is kind of bad dialogue. But yeah, again, like this kind of freedom of imagination of what you can do in the fantasy genre, I think is interesting for audio drama.
Perfect. I love that point about niches and word of mouth. In my experience, I find a lot of my like fantasy is one of my favorite genres, and I found so many other audio dramas just through word of mouth solely. I think like one of my favorite audio dramas I found through word of mouth on Reddit. So it's just incredible. If I may shout out a fantasy comedy audio drama that I really like is Absolutely No Adventures.
Absolutely No Adventures.
I love Absolutely No Adventure. So yeah, one of my favorites. But yeah, anything to add to that, Eira or Lumi?
I think it's interesting that those three are at the top because those are all can be broadly bracketed as speculative fiction. And it makes a lot of sense to me for some of the reasons that Audrey was saying that speculative fiction would do so well in the audio drama space, particularly in the indie space, which we're all part of here. And that's because, yeah, I think that people who are interested in those genres are used to looking further afield than just being able to walk into Waterstones and pick up a novel that they're going to like. Like, if you're a proper speculative fiction fan, whether you like horror or sci-fi or fantasy, you're kind of used to branching out a little bit and allowing the stories that you explore to be a little bit more experimental, a little bit more odd. And I think these genres all really lend themselves well to an audio medium because they allow you to stretch your imagination in a different kind of a way, and it's such a young medium in its current iteration. Actually, audio drama is the thing that's been around since since the start of radio, really. But in its current iteration, it's very, very young. It's all very new. Conventions in this space are still. I don't mean conventions like this one. I mean like the conventional things that you do and how you shape a story in this medium is still being developed. So it makes sense to me that speculative fiction would be dominating at this point in its like trajectory and growth as an industry, essentially.
Wonderful. Yes, I love that. It's really interesting because when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking more that audio fiction would be drawing in the listeners, but it almost seems like you've identified that actually listeners themselves who like fantasy would naturally turn towards something like audio fiction. There may be like a two-way correlation going on. there. So I think that's really, really interesting. Anything to add to that, Lumi?
I think most of it's been said already. I think people like. I think the people who listen to audio fiction like immersing themselves in kind of unfamiliar worlds, or it's also just be able to visualize things that they wouldn't otherwise get the chance to, wouldn't otherwise be prompted to visualize. I think it's a good medium for speculative fiction.
I love that. Yes, thank you so much. Okay, next question on my list. If you could adapt an existing fantasy property into an audio drama, what would it be and why? I'll start off with Eira this time.
Oh, it's the only one I don't have an answer that I feel solidly strong about, this one. Because I think my favourites have already been like kind of adapted into full cast audiobooks previously that I'm quite fond of. It's quite difficult for me to imagine being able to do something different to either of those. So I don't know. I think actually I might go a bit weird with it, and I think it might be fun to do an audio adaptation of the Bass Lag trilogy by China Miéville. And he's a new weird writer rather than a straight fantasy writer. And actually the Bass Lag novels are intended to they're sort of responsive to Tolkien. So he's doing a lot of stuff that feels very deliberately like, this is not Lord of the Rings. And as he grows as a writer throughout his career, he chills out a bit about that stuff. But I love it as this kind of experiment in fantasy that's like high fantasy that has no interest in following the conventions laid forth by Lord of the Rings. And because of the nature of some of the creatures and how the story works, I think it might lend itself really well to an audio drama adaptation. And the more I'm talking about this, the more I'm like, actually, that would be great. I'd love to do that.
That's your next project sorted, Eira. I look forward to hearing it. Lumi, how about yourself?
I don't have a super in-depth answer. I did. I've recently been reading this novel called "Someone You Can Build a Nest In" by John Wishwell. It's I like it a lot because it has a lot of imagery that's very visceral in a way that's kind of made to be beautiful in its own way, because it plays a lot with this like idea of the monstrous, and also sort of this alternate idea of sort of love and all these kinds of things. And I think it would be really interesting to see that in like a sound design audio medium. I think you could do a lot of really interesting things with that kind of nice spot between those things.
Wonderful. And Audrey?
I was thinking about it, and I came to the conclusion maybe the Locked Tomb trilogy by Tamsin Muir, with like Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth and all of those. Because like on one hand they're very funny, and I think with a good delivery, like some of the lines could be just brilliant in audio. But also because sometimes, especially like the Harrow the Ninth with the second person narration, I think that could be very interesting in audio drama, when like you hear someone say like, oh, you do this and this, and then you do this and this. I think that's always a very interesting choice in narration when you use second person. And also because you have like big bone monsters and like necromancy and then everything, like bone necromancy, and I think that would be very fun to listen to when someone would like audio edit that.
Wonderful. Oh, these are such interesting answers. I'm so excited. You have to all make them now. You didn't realise when you were signing up to this panel that you were contracting yourself to make these adaptations.
More work.
So I'm just putting that there now. Just joking, of course.
Maybe a copyright issue.
Might be difficult.
What the copywriters don't know can't hurt me. Right, next question. Fantasy often lends itself to a lot of world building, which is something we've absolutely touched upon. For those who don't know, that sort of broadly refers to like the rules of how a society or a system might work in a fantasy setting. It could encompass things like culture, history, geography, etc. And they tend to be quite detailed within this genre. Could I ask how you approach your world building for your audio dramas? And that can be through whichever method. It could be through your writing, sound design, directing, etc. So I'll start off with Audrey this time.
I think world building is one of my favorite things. And what is often said in like writing spaces is like you need to know so much more about your world than what is actually on the page. Um, Even if it's not like completely detailed. Like I don't think you need a detailed history of a country that you're creating, but you kind of need to know like, oh, how is their relationship to the neighbors? And it often shows through like little things like which food are the characters eating, like is there a festivity like in the city that they're in, like little things that make a place feel lived in. And I think that's really one of my favorite things, to just have the characters go somewhere and there's a festival going on, and like what kind of festival is it, why is there a festival like at that time, like what is the core of it. And I think that informs very much the world that the characters are in. Um, and where are your characters from? Where did they go in the kingdom, and like what did they learn? Everything like this. And I think that's just one of my favorite things, to just think of something and like the relationship of the king, like the country with like the world it's in, and how that has evolved over centuries, even if you don't have like a detailed plan of like in 1415 on April 2nd this war broke out. Like I don't think that's necessary. um but just to say like, oh, 400 years ago there was a war between these countries, and these are the consequences, and you can feel that nowadays because the characters go to a building, and half the building is still missing because no one rebuilt it. Like little stuff like this. And I think that's the most interesting part, to just have like these little details in a story.
I love that. I love that point about like history shaping today. I think that is something that is easy to forget. Sometimes you kind of just want to go into this like fully formed world, without thinking like actually there will be events in the past, even if the character's not been alive at that time,
Yep.
that will still affect them. So I think that's really, really interesting. How about yourself, Eira?
I think because I have this like background in writing all different kinds of genre, world building is an integral part of any story that you're telling, even if you're setting it in the real world. And thinking about world building in those terms, in terms of like what's going to impact each character, is really helpful when you're coming to a fantasy setting specifically, because I think there's a way of thinking about world building in fantasy that lends itself to this very Tolkien-esque approach to world building, and that can be really intimidating. And I think it lends itself to a certain kind of world building that can be quite limiting in terms of how you want to actually construct things and how you want to approach telling a story. And I think it's limiting in two ways. And the first is that, like, the Tolkien-esque approach, it's developed because he's a linguist. He's not really interested in telling a story. The story is almost incidental. He just wants this structure to exist so that he can justify why the languages are the way they are, which is why the books are such a mess. And I think that we have a tendency now, as kind of like the people who follow Tolkien, to try and approach our worlds in the same way, to kind of try and imagine things as a progression, and knowing things all the way through. But really, world building is a part of every story. It's a part of how you set the scene. It's a part of how you set your location. It's a part of who your characters are. In the same way that where you grew up and the cultures that you're surrounded by impact who you are. It's the same for characters in any story, in any world, in any genre. And so really that gives you permission then when you approach fantasy to think of it a little bit more flexibly and not think about it in terms of like, oh, I need to have like a 700-page lore book with maps in it and 400 pages of why my conlang works and stuff like that, which can be like I kind of hinted at earlier, super overwhelming as a thing, and it might not be a thing that you're super interested in as a writer, particularly if you're the kind of writer that I am, where you want everything to be very constructed and slot together in this way that everything feels contingent upon every other thing. In fantasy, if you're approaching it in that big Tolkien-esque kind of way, it can be really difficult to imagine how you can make all of those cogs mesh together. Some people's brains work like that, and a lot of fantasy writers I speak to have these gorgeously expansive worlds that go on and on and on. But for me, what's important is having a set of consistent rules and logistics that work, and that's the same across all genres I work in. With fantasy, it's much more it's a much longer list because I have to keep track of things like in 12 Elms, for example, how the magic works and where this fictional culture is, because I don't have research. You're basically making up your own research when you're doing fantasy. So I don't have research touch points I can go back to. So I have to make sure that I keep a list of those things. So it's a much more detailed and comprehensive list than it necessarily would be. And then my rule of thumb is to make sure everything goes 2 layers deep. So that's how you make it feel big and expansive. And whether you have like a real like actually fleshed out lore book that exists in as a tome, and I do have a lot of lore for the 12 Arms world. It's quite expansively developed, but my rule of thumb for this is two layers deep, so everybody should be able to ask 2 questions about how something goes, and that's a trick I've heard used for DMs playing TTRPGs. So like you just have to be able to give 2 answers to expand how this thing works, and that's generally going to satisfy the players, even if you're flying by the seat of your pants. So you can just say like, oh, people go, well, why are there fish in this well? It doesn't make any sense. Oh, they were put there and they've now evolved to become this really specific subspecies. But why were they put there? They were brought by some shepherds who went to some rock pools and they brought them, and then now they live there and now they clean the sides of the well. And that's a satisfying enough depth of question, that generally speaking, that people are going to feel satisfied for it. So you just need to be able to gesture at a larger context, and really I found that anything more than that, and you start to get people saying like, oh my god, I just can't keep track of everything.
Wow, yes. I remember I tried reading Lord of the Rings when I was younger, and I did find it quite dense, and I was just trying to keep track of like everything was just like, whoa, like there's a lot going on here. So yeah, that is a great point about not making it too dense that you just end up confusing people and they can't keep track. I think that's a really good point. You've got to achieve a balance there.
I think
Audrey, go ahead.
I think there's also a sort of freedom of like just saying your character doesn't know that. Like your main character just doesn't know why there's fish in this pond. You know, like yes, sure, someone brought them in, but then like if it happened 100 years ago, why is there a pond? You know, like your characters is not gonna know that. And I think you don't always have to over explain everything, especially if it's something that just doesn't really matter. And like if I look around at my hometown and then there's a pond and there's a pond for fishers, but like why? I don't really care, and I don't really need to know, like as the main character, like every detail of how something works. Like also with like magic systems, like it's fun to kind of know how it works, and as like a writer to know how it works to have like a consistency. But going too much into details is it's just limiting yourself from advancing the story um, at a good pace, because then you're just like so focused on like the details that you're never going to finish the actual story. And then does it really matter? Do you really need to know all these details? So I think the 2-layer thing is a good rule. because you don't need more than 2 layers to understand like why it exists.
I think it gives you a nice amount of constraint, doesn't it, to stop you from falling down a little rabbit hole.
Yeah.
How about yourself, Lumi?
I think my world building, when I world build, tends to be a little bit incidental sometimes. It's very I think often my world when I build worlds, it happens as a result of a character needing to experience a specific thing. So it'll be like, what, this character goes to a location and and this sort of kind of type of story needs to happen, or this is a contrast to this character has not experienced before, and then sort of building from that in a sort of thematic sense. I'm also a fan of trying to. I think you can do a lot of world building by subverting tropes. I think that happens a lot. For instance, I think Absolutely No Adventures has a lot of world building that's specifically built from subverting a trope, and saying, "Oh, what if this person who is in every chosen one prophecy did not want to be a chosen one and just wanted to start a bakery?" And then all of these things happened as a result of that, right? And I think you can do a lot by subverting those things and subverting kind of expectations. I remember, I think one thing I think is very fun in fantasy world building is that you can take something that is a convention in real life and sort of change it up in an interesting way. Wanderer's Journal has a neo-pronoun normative society where people where people don't really use pronouns in terms of gender, and I think that was a fun thing to sort of put together. And yeah, I don't know. I think you can discover a lot of world building by discovering it along with characters, and have characters have different types of knowledge and sort of compare notes in that way, because people in real life also notice different things about the parts of the world they encounter, and and sometimes one location can look very different to two different people depending on what type of person they are. And I think that's a fun thing to explore, to discover world building. I think that also happens in TTRPGs sometimes. Like if you have a character who's really into geology, they might notice they may not notice geological composition, and then maybe that is important in the world. But if you don't have that, maybe it would be something else that's important to the world, or maybe they just sort of work off their impulses when they meet new people and they talk to people, and that's how they discover the world. And I think you can build from that as well.
I love that point about different perspectives and how, things will appear differently. And I think TTRPGs really lend itself well to that. That's a really interesting point. Perfect. So the next question I have is, so with audio drama, you don't have the visual aspect. So what methods and techniques do you use to enhance those more imaginative fantasy aspects for the listeners? Again, that could either be through writing, sound design, direction, etc. I'll start off with Eira this time.
I think rather than like thinking about it in terms of it lacking a visual element, my background is all in prose writing rather than approaching stuff from screen, although my big fantasy love is The Lord of the Rings, and specifically via the films. So it's more about trying to make a story that fits the medium it's being told in than thinking about it as a medium that's defined by what it lacks. Because there's so much that audio drama has that film doesn't have a capacity to do, and that prose doesn't have a capacity to do. So what are the things that make an audio drama stand out? What makes it sing? What is the appeal to it? And you have this kind of elastic sense of space and time in audio drama that is, it's not entirely unique to the genre, but not to the genre, to the medium, but it is something that you can play with really directly, and that's a really important storytelling component for it. And it's also an incredibly intimate form of media. So unlike with film, where you've got the separation between you and the screen, and even with a book, where you can close it and stop at any time. Audio drama has a temporal space, so it starts and finishes at its own pace. The story will not stop for you. You have to let it keep going unless you press pause, of course. But it has this temporal existence in time in the way that a novel doesn't do, and it will just keep going. And you can push people and make them feel super uncomfortable in ways like that, or really draw them in emotionally and flexibly use sound to draw their attention to different aspects of things that are going on around it. Audio drama has loads of things about it that make it sing as a medium for storytelling in general. And in fantasy in specific, it's such an atmospheric medium. It really lends itself well to establishing these really dynamic and interesting atmospheres. And you can do it gesturally because you have this, as opposed to in prose, where you only have the words on the page to really do it, without even making a big fuss about it. You can use sound design as this extra dimension for all of that world building that we were talking about just before, and also for how you develop a character and how you show all of these things, and then just the general sense of atmosphere by adding in different layers of sound, and you may not even be conscious of it as a listener, but there'll be things like you can add in like an unsettling hum that just makes everything feel just slightly discordant as a thing is going on. And you can use sound to imbue a sense of magic to a scene, or a sense of, like I said, dread, or anything like that. And because fantasy and atmosphere, I mean, all story and atmosphere, but fantasy in particular, they're really important. Like, you sell those ideas based on the tone and how you establish that atmosphere around those ideas. So audio is a fantastic medium for telling fantasy stories for all of those reasons.
I love that. I really love that you gave concrete examples as well. And I think it is a really good reminder that we shouldn't see audio fiction as a sort of lesser medium just because it doesn't have the visual aspect, but actually it has its own unique strengths that people can play to, and really it really provides a different experience, and that's why it's one of my favorite mediums. Yes. Would you like to add anything to that, Audrey?
Yeah. I think Eira is right with like the atmosphere. I think that is really something very unique to audio dramas, that you can create so much through like sound design and through music and everything. And especially if you consider that I don't know the percentage of people listening with like headphones, but it is something, if you're listening with headphones, that is very close to you. It's like right there in your ears. Um, so it's extremely immersive in that sense, or it can be very immersive. Like otherwise, you can also listen to it in your car and like miss half the things. But if you're really listening to it with headphones, you can really be in it, especially with like a good atmosphere. With like, if you have the right music and the right sound editing, um, it really builds this like mystery. Is really good with like this, where you're like wondering, "Ooh, what is this sound? What can this mean?" And then you, as the listener, kind of imagine it yourself without the creator really telling you exactly what it is. And I think that's really interesting that you are, as a listener, participating kind of in the world building by imagining yourself like what it could be through the clues that you get with the audio.
Wonderful. Anything to add to that, Lumi?
Yeah, I don't know. I think one thing I really like about audio drama in its sort of modern iteration is also the fact that audio drama can follow you throughout your day if you're like going for walks with headphones, or you're on public transport. And like, I don't know, whenever I whenever I walk somewhere where I've listened to an episode of an audio drama, sometimes I'll get memories of it while I'm walking. I'm walking there, I'll be like, oh, this is where I listened to that episode where this happened. And I think that's a really beautiful thing because it kind of manages to sort of decorate your surroundings and your everyday life in a really interesting way. And yeah, I think atmosphere is a huge part of that. And also, you can play with silences in a way you can't really always do with prose. And there's one huge advantage I think audio drama has also in terms of speculative fiction and sort of weird fiction is also the fact that you can sort of you can show things that are visually impossible and you can imply things that can't really be described. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to have in fantasy. You can create it's also probably one of the reasons why it works so well with horror, because you can kind of have the atmosphere of something without needing to show too much. You can have and you can have a fantasy monster without necessarily having to over describe what it is. And I just think that's a really cool thing to have.
I love that. I love that point about I think you described it as audio drama decorating your everyday life. I really love that because it's so true. Like, I will just be like making soup in the kitchen and something really dramatic will happen in an audio drama. And I'm like, my soup making is now 10 times as exciting.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's wonderful. And I really like that point about silence as well, because I've found that, like, I will shout out another recent fantasy audio drama that I listened to called Hymns for the Road, which is a fantastic sort of post-apocalyptic fantasy audio drama about these sort of a band of survivors sort of traveling across what is now sort of like an America full of like Fey people and things like that. It's really cool. But yeah, I find that has long stretches of silence, and then like you will get like, it's not even a sudden sound, but you'll just start getting the sound back again, and it becomes really unnerving. And I really like that as well. So that's such a good point. So that was the last question I had. Although I did actually, I say that, but I did want to ask. I know that alongside fantasy, Eira, I know you've also got not sci-fi, a horror podcast as well, Not Quite Dead, I believe.
Yes, Not Quite Dead is a horror romance, a gory horror romance. I do have a horror sci-fi story as well, Clockwork Bird, which is the first show I ever made. And then Spirit Box is cozy horror. It's a little bit soft fantasy and it's a little bit sci-fi as well in its own little ways.
Wonderful. I do have Not Quite Dead on my list. So that's great. And I know that Lumi, you're due to work on the Mechadova engine, which I'm so excited about. I'm really excited about that one. Again, Audrey, do you have any other genres that you've got beside fantasy that you're working on?
No, because since I'm the only one working on my show, I have no time for anything else. But there's so much I would love to work on. Yeah.
That's valid. The question I wanted to ask was, do you think there's going to be, or how do you navigate the differences in genre within audio fiction? So did you find that there was like a huge difference between having that sort of fantasy side and then going into sci-fi horror? Or did you find that the process was pretty much the same? It was just a different story that you were telling. Lumi, do you want to start us off?
I think I world build very similarly for the Mechadova engine as I would a fantasy story. There's a significant difference in the fact that the Mechadova engine is very much based on our world and on a very specific historical period, but it's shifted slightly to the left due to some time and some alternate events that have happened and stuff like that. So there's but there's sort of still a very kind of fantastical vibe to it, even when there's no magic in it. I wanted it to feel a little bit out there, and I use some of the some similar elements in that, sort of implying things you can't really show. I unlike Wondrous Journal, I was the primary world builder on the Mechadova engine, so I had a lot more control of it, and I think it taught me a lot more about how I world build. But I don't know, I use a very similar method in that we are witnessing the world through a character who has very specific interests and ideas and sort of a very specific framework for experiencing the world. And I'm using that as sort of the starting point. So like, here's what this character would notice, and this is very different from what other characters might notice because the other characters have been here the whole time, and this character is noticing it through pre-existing knowledge that no one else has, and you can sort of, and they sort of compare notes about the world in that way. And I think that's a fun way to world build. Another thing is that both with fantasy and also with things like Mechadova, which is steampunk, I don't know if I mentioned that, I would have a set of sort of storytelling rules or world building rules. I think those can overlap sometimes, where it's like, okay, here's something that will probably never happen because of this. Here's things that will always happen if you're here, and all those types of rules to sort of ground the world and make it feel real, even when there are fantastical things happening.
I love that. Oh, I'm so glad I got to have like a little sneaky peek into the Mechadoma engine. I can't wait. Eira, how about yourself? Did you find there was like a huge leap between fantasy and sci-fi, or as you said previously, sci-fi? Apologies, sci-fi and horror, or because they're all speculative? Did you find that the process was pretty much similar?
I think I have such a set process for writing, that it's sort of a machine at this point. So the way I come at a problem is going to be the same, whatever genre I'm tackling it in. But there has been, each project is its own beast. Even though I have this very prescriptive way of approaching a story and way of planning a story, the thing that's different about fantasy, I guess, is that you have to be very careful about, like, if you want something that feels, you don't necessarily have to have a thing that feels coherent and consistent, but because of the kind of writer I am, I my brain kind of breaks if I don't have these sets of rules. So really, to satisfy myself, I feel like I need this, similar to what Lumi was saying, a list of interconnected storytelling and world building rules that feel like they're going to give you a direction and a place to go. Interestingly, both 12 Elms and Not Quite Dead are stories that have their beginnings in very old storytelling in my life. So both of them, 12 Elms is just slightly younger than Not Quite Dead, but there's not much in it. But both of them they come from ideas that I started thinking about like a very, very long time ago. And that's a very different approach to something like Remnants, which is a very, it's an idea constructed specifically to exist in audio drama. Audio drama was always going to be its home, and so that's that's more different for me. So Remnants and 12 Elms are completely different sorts of projects in this really significant way, even though they're both within fantasy as a genre, because Remnants is designed from the ground up to be an audio drama. It couldn't really be anything else, and to be something else it would really change. Whereas 12 Elms began as a story that I thought when I was younger I would write as a novel, and then it is now an audio drama that has this, it's a single narrator audio drama for the most part. But yeah, it has this shape that I had to adapt almost into an audio sort of shape. So that feels much more different to me than approaching something like that's genre specific, if that makes any sense.
No, I love that. That's really, really cool. Audrey, anything to add on that point before we go to the Twitch chat for questions?
I don't know if like different genres really make a big, like, especially if you stay in like the speculative fiction genres, that really changes that much. I feel like maybe if you went more into like comedy, like like contemporary comedy, or maybe just like pure romance or something, maybe there would be more of a difference because and even then, like you still have kind of like world building, just not the same world building you do for speculative fiction. It's way more grounded and more like research into like an actual town that exists, for example. Um, but I don't know if like you change from fantasy to science fiction or to horror, if like a lot of it changes. Maybe horror because you have to be more um mindful of like creating the specific emotions of like you're trying to create fear of suspense in people that maybe you don't have the same with certain types of fantasy. Of course, you can go like fantasy horror or you can go cozy fantasy. I think that's more the difference, like the tone that you're trying to portray with your story, and not just like the fantasy, which is like the setting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All those answers were really, really interesting. I love that. I will take a question from the Twitch chat that I can see from Quills. The question is, have you witnessed a flavour of a specific fantasy subgenre, for example, high fantasy, urban fantasy, in audio drama? Do you have a preference? So I'll start off with Audrey this time.
Do I have a preference? I don't think so. I just like when people try any type of speculative fiction. So I'm interested in when people make it a bit weird, like maybe not something that's like classic high fantasy or something, but like just like a little twist that maybe we haven't seen yet. I think that's what interests me most, when it's something where I'm go like, oh, I haven't encountered that yet. I'm gonna listen to it. Um, but otherwise, even if it's like a very good high fantasy or urban fantasy, and it's a bit more classic, I think I would still be very interested in it.
Wonderful. I wonder if you've got any examples of any sort of something that feels a bit more weird that you like that you could share, if you can remember any.
Um, what I'm listening to now is, and I hope I'm gonna pronounce that correctly, Levian, which is
Oh yes,
fairly
I've listened to
recent.
that.
Yeah,
That's very good.
yeah, and I they do interesting things with the sound design, where it's like
Yes,
you're not exactly sure what is happening, and it's like different layers of like voices and everything. And I think that's very interesting, the way they're doing that.
I totally agree. I've listened to that one, and
Mm,
it is it feels very immersive, but
yeah,
also it keeps you on edge. You're just like the whole time. I'm just like sort of what's going to happen next.
yeah.
I really love that. How about yourself, Eira?
I think the trend tends to be that you see stuff more on the low fantasy end, so like that feels more almost magical realism. Vibes, I feel like that touches so many different shows, and I think it's also really common to have those top three genres that you were talking about before, that from your listener survey, in genre crossover. So stuff like, I think the quintessential one is probably the Silt versus being a horror fantasy show, which yeah, those kinds of genre crossovers within speculative fiction, because genre is a bit more, it's more wobbly than we'd like to think. It's more than anything, um genre is a way that bookshops organize books,
Mm,
and so these terms, they slip in and out of one another, and I think this prevalence of crossover within audio drama speaks to what I was talking about ages ago, about that sense of still looking for convention within the space and in the industry, and how we're shaping the medium as it grows. And it's really cool to see this prevalence of crossover and bringing in different elements of all different things and mashing them together, and this sense of play in the storytelling, which is really cool. And I think fantasy lends itself really well to whatever kind of fantasy it is.
I love that point about like mashing up genres. I think some of my favorite fantasy audio fiction has always been some sort of mashup. Like you say, one of my favorites is called Aquilo, which is a cozy horror audio fiction. It's cozy in the sense that it's about a woman who runs a bakery, and all the prose around the bakery is amazing. It's so like descriptive, and you have that cozy local town, everyone knows each other vibe. But then when it gets to the horror, it's like, it blends them in this way that is like, it doesn't feel clashing. It feels really, really good. But yeah, wonderful. Lumi, how about yourself?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have a huge preference in subgenre either. My favorite audio dramas tends to be ones that play around with the audio medium in a very specific way, or with storytelling tropes or storytelling ideas in an interesting way. I really like the way something like the Attic Monologues does fantasy, and that's also kind of magical realism in the way it does it. And I'm also just, I really enjoy kind of cozy, almost nostalgic episodic things like Absolutely No Adventures and side questing. I think they have, I don't know, I think the vibe is just very pleasant, and I think it reminds me of recognize, but it also plays around with some things, and yeah, it's yeah, and oftentimes adds some queerness to it. I think that's also really nice to see, and yeah, I think that's all I have to say on that.
Wonderful. I love that. By the way, the Attic Monologues, I believe, is going to be one of our listening parties in the podcast book club Discord. So if you do want to join the Discord to be part of that when it starts, that would be incredible. I'm very much looking forward to that. I love the listening parties. It's always a great time. There is another question from the chat. I think we'll take this as the last question and then wrap up. Bear with me. Jem asks, what are your favourite fantasy audio dramas? Asking to Amina too. Thank you, Jem. You've got me started, so I'll have to try and really stop myself from just giving you all a whole list, because I do love a good fantasy audio drama. My absolute favourite fantasy audio drama, and my favourite audio drama today, is The Once and Future Nerd. It is an epic high fantasy about three American college kids who get transported to a fantasy realm, classic fairies, elves, dwarves, etc. But what I like about it is very socially aware and very, contemporary. It's almost like, I almost feel like it's a bit of a cop out to say Lord of the Rings, but for the modern age, because I feel like it's more than that. It's its own thing. And just the humor, the plotting, the thing I love about that show is the way it does its storytelling gives you that moment of revelation just before like a plot twist happens. Like, you put the pieces together in your mind of what's going to happen, and you just sit there and you're like, oh my god, they're going to go there, and then they go there, and you're just sitting there like, oh my god, they went there. And it just has some incredible world building. Each season just gives you new perspectives of different races, different people in the world, which, it's one of those where it's like you don't realize the whole scope of the thing until you listen to it. I think it's really, really incredible. I do want to shout out another one, which I think is very underrated, is Stories from Yalmore, which is it's so lovely. It's about these young witch, young werewolf, and their friend, and they're all it's just these precocious kids basically just getting up to well-intentioned mischief in the neighborhood, and it's all about just navigating like friendship, growing up. It's just a wonderful time. It's one of those where I feel like it's not necessarily aimed at kids, but I feel like kids would benefit from listening to it. I think it's just a really wonderful time, you know, and it has that humour that of like how blunt kids can be. That really works well there. But I'll stop rambling now because I could go on forever. Lumi, what are your favourite fantasy audio dramas?
Yeah, I think it would probably it sort of fades into some other genres as well, but I think one of my absolute favorites is the Kingmaker histories.
Yes.
I think that's a really good one, and I like the way it does magic, and I like the way it plays with the historical period it's inspired from, and it's just, and you know, the characters are really enjoyable. I always have such a good time listening to it. I think, yeah, and again, otherwise I tend to like things like Absolutely No Adventures, side questing. I also like the Attic Monologues. I've mentioned those already.
Wonderful. Eira?
Camlan, almost definitely.
Oh yeah.
Love it. It's like post-apocalyptic fantasy based on Welsh folklore. It's got stellar sound design, and wonderful music. Some really fantastic vocal performances, and it's an itty bitty bite-sized little show. You can listen to it in an afternoon if you want. Although I would suggest savoring it. Yeah, Camlan's just wonderful.
It's so good. I should have mentioned that one.
And Audrey?
I really like the Boar Knight. And it's so cozy. It's like about a boar who's a knight who goes out on a quest. And it's very reminiscent of like kind of like classic knight tales, and you know, like the old tales where they go out on a quest. And it's very cozy, and it has like musical parts of it and everything, and it's so nice. It's just so cute.
Wonderful. Quills did ask, can you drop the name again? So I think, I'm not sure if you're referring to the ones I mentioned, Quills, but the ones I mentioned were The Once and Future Nerd and Stories from Yelmore. So Yelmore is spelled Ylelmore, if I've got that correctly. And yeah, one more time, Lumi, Eira, Audrey, could you just repeat the names of the audio fictions that you mentioned for me? Lumi, do you want to start?
Yeah, the Kingmaker histories, I think, was the one that was new. Yeah.
Eira?
Camlan.
Camlan. And Audrey?
The Boar Knight.
The Boar Knight. Fantastic. Thank you. I need to check those out as well. Okay, I can't see any other questions in the Twitch chat. Hopefully I've not missed anything. So I think we shall wrap it there. Thank you so much, everyone. It was a really amazing panel. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.